Welcome back to New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. The views are becoming much more radical, but within the mainstream. We've got that story plus eat the bugs. But first, Pfizer, CIA, Facebook, and other elites secretly meet in D.C. Corporate media silent. We grabbed this from Matt Agarist. The world's ruling elite met in secret last week. No press allowed in, no one interviewed about it, and Bilderberg didn't even register as a blip within the mainstream media's radar. I've got one blip, actually. As the media, of course, hypes gun control and abortion debates, almost like it's some weird ritual or something. Bankers, politicians, military leaders, and information controllers were discussing their plans for the world behind closed doors, again, with zero transparency. The 68th annual Bilderberg meeting, held in locations around the world throughout the years, kicked off last Thursday, very secretively, very seemingly suddenly, in Washington, D.C. Absolutely no press coverage, and they wrapped it up by Sunday the 5th. Again, allegedly. Despite a prestigious guest list of around 120 attendees who will arguably have more of a global influence than any of the selected officials we all get to yell and scream about. The meeting, of course, will escape any scrutiny in the MSM. The reason this meeting of the global elite manages to remain free of all this coverage is no accident, because the elite power brokers own that media. They own those politicians we cheer and jeer about, and they arguably own the world. In attendance to this year's meetings, James, again, we joke. We were just joking a few minutes ago. We talked about this before. We've indeed talked about this many, many times. In attendance to this year's meetings are war criminals like Henry Kissinger, Albert Edible Microchips Bourla, the CEO of the criminal pharmaceutical corporation known as Pfizer, head of the CIA, William J. Burns, Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, GlaxoSmithKline CEO, Emma Walmsley, Eric Schmidt, of course, the infamous former CEO of Google, and Canada's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, who this year, you might recall, ordered banks to freeze the accounts of Liberty protesters. Scotiabank did say they were sorry, though. It included, of course, other heads of corporate media, foreign heads of state, military officials, according to those elite group of power brokers made up of people who force vaccines, lockdowns, and tyranny on the entire effing planet for the last 2 years. They're allegedly talking about these things: geopolitical realignments, NATO challenges, China, Indo-Pacific realignment, Sino-U.S. tech competition. You could probably collapse those last three into one things. Russia. By the way, continuity of government and the economy. Disruption of the global financial system. Disinformation being discussed by people behind closed doors with no scrutiny. Energy security, sustainability, post-pandemic health, fragmentation of democratic societies, trade and deglobalization, and, of course, that hot new single to hit the charts coming in at number 14, Ukraine, of course. Bilderberg Group meets in secret to discuss disinformation. But, James, I went to Gulag News. They have 7 articles. The Guardian, that's as big as it gets by far, but in their, I guess, defense, they do support it, probably because they used to have some guy that wrote for them that I'm sure they've long since fired. So they maybe feel somewhat maybe married to the coverage. After that, things I've never heard of, sorry. The Trumpet, Paradise News, People's World, the Westmeath Examiner, and, of course, Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. Meanwhile, there are literally hundreds of stories on that same Gulag News about concerned citizen turned actor, governor wannabe who showed up to cry about guns at this week's White House press briefing variety show. Matthew McConaughey, that's right, tells the story of those killed in Uvalde, Texas, an emotional performative plea for action for the current thing at star-studded White House press briefing. James, I was joking on the morning show. It's like MTV's Total Request Live over there. Again, from the kids that wanted to bring dignity back to the Whitey House. From what I've seen, and I believe I heard that Burmas, again, this was announced and was found out at the last minute. I think the word from dudes like Jason Burmas was like, man, I couldn't have even made the 16-hour or whatever trip by the time the thing would have been done. Seems like Luke from We Are Changed was the only dude out there in the District of Criminals trying to report on that so-called elite confab that dare not speaketh its name. James?
Well, James, great minds think alike, and apparently we do too, because I Did the exact same search as you. I had the same experience as I think everyone, kind of caught off guard when this press release was suddenly out there and was being announced, and I thought, I totally missed this. Sorry. We should have had this on New World Next Week last week, but now we're doing New World last week, I guess. But no, it's because they didn't put out the announcement until the meeting was already underway, and there was no pre-announcement or pre-speculation about this that I saw anywhere, even in the independent media. I did the same search as you did for mainstream coverage of this or anything that's showing up on the radar. And basically, the main article is the Guardian article from Charlie Skelton, who people will remember. They can go back in my archives. I've interviewed him a couple of times. He was the mainstream comedian who found out about Bilderberg and decided to cover it as a joke for MSM newspapers in England, and then found out it was very real. This isn't a joke, and has been one of the only people writing about this in anything approaching the mainstream for the last decade plus. So this is kind of, in a way, just the whole coverage of this or non-coverage of this is indicative of Bilderberg as a whole. Remember back in 2006, 7, 8, 9, the old school truther days? Bilderberg was a huge deal, and everyone talked about it, and people were there and protesting and looking at the agenda and seeing who's driving in and out and all of this kind of stuff, and there was intel coming out from the inside. Now it's almost nothing. And you might have noticed they haven't had a Bilderberg meeting since 2019, so this is interesting. It has now managed to fly almost completely under the radar by essentially becoming public, in a sense, having bilderbergmeetings.org putting up their official, this is the agenda, and the official participant list, and it's probably mostly lies anyway, but whatever, it's all official, there's nothing secret about it, so you can't get crazy about it, you silly conspiracy theorists. We announce it, it's all out in the open. We rent out a hotel under the cover of some sort of Hong Kong government function or something, and put up the Hong Kong flag at this hotel and screen it off so no one can see what's going on inside. And then while the meeting is in progress, we gave out a press release that put these points on. Anyway, nonsense. I hope people will read the Charlie Skelton article, because he does get into some good details about it, including, of course, Klaus Schwab being an important part of the Bilderberg, previous head or member of the steering committee, but also the intelligence agency connections here, including CIA head William Burns, as well as former spies, Petraeus and John Sawers of MI6 and others who will be there. Gives a nod to Henry Kissinger, and he ends up by saying Bilderberg knows that however the global realignment plays out and whatever a reset global financial system looks like, the shape of the world will be determined by big tech. And if the end game is continuity of government, as the agenda suggests, that continuity will be powered by AI. Whatever billionaire ends up making the software that runs the world, Bilderberg aims to make damn sure that it has its hand on the mouse. Yeah, all right. Well, that is the one agenda item that really stuck out to me. Continuity of government and the economy. That all the rest is kind of cookie cutter boilerplate stuff. We would expect them to be talking about China and World War III kind of stuff and Ukraine and all of that. But the continuity of government and the economy seems so spot on for what we are about to be plunged into, doesn't it? Other than that, I think the only thing that I could find of any real substance was a tweet from Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, for those keeping track at home, who tweeted out a picture of him talking to the Prime Minister of Finland presumably at the Bilderberg conference, talking about, quote, we discussed the need to address Turkey's concerns and move forward with the NATO membership application by Finland and Sweden. So yes, of course, major geopolitical realignments and events taking place at Bilderberg being discussed, not a peep from the corporate media, except Charlie Skelton at The Guardian. Yeah, business as usual, I suppose. But anyway, Bilderberg 2022, I guess it came and went, guys. So if anyone has any intel on this, now would be the time to let it out to the world. Other than that, I guess, all eyes on Davos, no eyes on Bilderberg. Interesting change that's happened in the last few years, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's gone, through this whole cycle where now it's nearly back to what it originally was. It's back to sort of being hidden in plain sight. Oh yeah, y'all found out about it. Yeah, whatever. It's just right. Again, we've been saying a lot. They're not even hiding it anymore. on a multiple list of things. This kind of reminds you just said, you reminded me of a lot of things. I'm glad you more fully explained the Charlie Sexton thing. I could remember that, but like a lot of times, James, I make some wild accusations. You actually go and source it out. That's who I was thinking of when I was thinking of who first wrote about it on The Guardian. When he first cracks in on war games and he's just, going down the list, it's like, oh, checkers, chess, global thermonuclear war. That's what continuity of government is like on this list. Yeah, whatever, China, Russia, whatever. Last week, and I've been playing some kind of classic shows of monarchy from the day in history when I'm playing it. Last week, I was playing one from 2012, from a decade ago. And this goes to what we were talking about. I had a live guest on the air, Alex Thomas from the Intel Hub, AJ's bullhorning in the background. It was, of course, a giant thing back in the heyday of go-go trutherism, I suppose, James. I will include the link to, yes, indeed, Scotiabank apologizes over trucker convoy account freeze. Chrystia Freeland forced them to do it. They basically have said the government forced us to take your money. We didn't really want to do it, and now we'll quietly say, hey, sorry about that. That's just how we get going here on New World Next Week, episode 487. We, of course, head to school where primary school pupils to be offered insects to eat in alternative protein study. From Wales Online, children at 4 primary schools will be offered insect protein during workshops to gauge youngsters' appetite for alternative protein. This is like, I guess, the new social credit thing in Italy. We're not forcing it on it. We just have hamburgers, pizza, bugs. You can choose. Until those other choices, of course, are removed. The children will reportedly be given a product called Vexo, V-E-X-O. That sounds delicious. Big V, little e, big X, little o, a combination of insect and plant-based protein. The product is said to look like conventional mince. We might know that here in the States as mincemeat. The I newspaper said researchers are hoping to use data from the study to learn how to best educate children about the nutritional and environmental benefits of eating creepy crawlies. Crickets, grasshoppers, silkworms, locusts, mealworms, the stuff you feed caged lizards at the pet store. The investigation, which will use children aged 5 to 11, is being led by Christopher Baer at Cardiff University. The study will use surveys, workshops, interviews, focus groups to explore young people's understandings of alternative proteins. And as part of the research, they will be offered a sample if they wish to try it. Mr. Baer told the Eye, we want the twinks to think about alternative proteins as real things for now, rather than just as foods for the future. So trying some of these foods is central to the research. His name is Mr. Baer. It's just right there. I can't let that one go. Although edible insects are, please leave Corbett's, disgusted face right there in the shot. Although edible insects are, for now, not widely sold in the UK, they form part of the diet of around 2 billion people worldwide. I actually went over the original I News report last week on my Food World Order morning show. Scientists hope to feed primary school children edible insects to make the UK greener. That headline seems a little more truthy, James. I guess I kind of feel about this like I feel about a bunch of other things. If you want to eat grubs, press on. If you're a gender fluid otherkin who's proud that they're obese, have fun. If you want to smother to death in a mask, woo, it is your choice. It's when it becomes an agenda, the mandates, the fake movements by, obviously, the Malthusian sets that meet in private. When it gets shoved down the throats and everybody starts to repeat it and they try and tell you and me and everybody else what you can eat, see, say, and of course, where does it end? Like that book, What You Can Think. That's for me where it starts to get problematic with starting to push these agendas. And that's obviously, James, isn't that a part of this agenda? We were just talking last week or a couple weeks ago. It's like it's baked into the cake, as, again, we mentioned, and as we'll get into again in a few minutes in our last story. But hey, one last good news grub on the grill to fly in the face of all of this. Driven by a string of disappointing quarterly results, Beyond Meat stock dropped 28% last month in May. We can, of course, only hope that Dr. Gates was still in on that and lost a bunch of money. James.
Well, Amen to your little mini rant there, James, because I think that's the point. Yeah, if you want to eat the bugs, go and eat the bugs. I ain't stopping you. Sure, absolutely. Have fun. I'm sure it is healthy and nutritious and wonderful, but I'm going to choose no. Do I get to choose no? Do I get to call out when children are being steeped into this and conditioned to do things that their families would have thought even a few years ago? That's bizarre. I don't want to do that. But now they're being conditioned into it so that by the time they become adults, they'll be teaching their children about eating the bugs. It is clearly an agenda. And that is exactly what I do resent about this. But again, yeah, it's funny because every time topics like this come up, I will get emails from people. There's nothing wrong with eating bugs, James. They're quite nutritious. Great. Awesome. Go for it. But I'm going to say no. Thank you very much. I think I'm all right. Anyway, I think that's really the point of this. This is an agenda. This is not some sort of thing about saving the planet, of course. It is about training us to be neo-feudal peasants on the neo-feudal plantation. And on a related note, people might have seen recently Prince Charles was pimping masks for cows. Because now the cows have to wear masks, not for COVID, although actually, hopefully, it does help prevent some COVID among the cow population. No. To help save the planet, one burp at a time. All these cows going around expelling methane into the atmosphere. Not if you've got these special masks that they've designed with catalytic converters inside the mask that will convert their methane, their cow burps, into water and carbon dioxide. I don't know. I don't even know what they're converting it into. But yay, thank you. Yes. Again, this is part of a coordinated agenda, and every part of it is trying to get you in a mortal state of fear over the weather gods that we have upset with our presence upon this planet. And the way to atone for that is to essentially live like peasants. Go back, start living off the earth and, eating bugs and wearing masks and doing whatever your overlords say whenever they say it. And if you show enough piety, maybe you can atone for your carbon sins. It is nonsense. I reject it. If you want to go along with every part of the agenda, you are totally free to do so, but don't make me buy into this neo-religion.
It's fun sometimes to play the game of, do you think this is true, or is it a Babylon Bee satire article? I'm sure folks might have think, oh, Prince Charles, whatever. Oh, that just goes, that's a true one. We'll include that, just like all the other crazy accusations we make, always included down in our show notes. I think one of the ones I was playing around with is, do you think this is real or fake? Burger King debuts new Pride Whopper with 2 tops or 2 bottom buns. Indeed, it's true, but only in Austria. This
James, sorry, I gotta stop you. I wasn't pulling a face earlier because of the Mr. Bear thing. I was pulling a face because your camera jostled and now your head's cut off a little, and Brock is going to be really upset about that. So, can you adjust your camera just a little, or just stoop down?
I don't want to mess with it because that might make it worse. I'd rather just adjust myself. All right. And now I'm all in the shot.
Yep.
High-tech operations here in alternative media again. If we were fake-funded AstroTurf stuff, don't you think like my camera wouldn't be falling down? The camera I've been using since, I don't know, we started this show. This might be American jerk talking, but going back to that previous article, those 2 billion people who eat bugs, I bet you they might like to have a delicious local farm-raised burger if they had the chance. Like those memes of people in the boats, oh my gosh, I had to get away from free market capitalism, said no one ever. I believe it was the once great poet W. Axl Rose that said, I don't need your Civil War. Race Card Institute's alarmist new poll finds 44% of Americans see Civil War. We grabbed this from USA Today. The poll in April of 1,500 whole Americans by, of course, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, and something called Tolchin Research found that 45% of young Republican men and 42% of young male Democrats said they approve of violence to achieve political change. The poll suggests that Americans fear for the future of the republic. 44% of Americans agreed the U.S. seems headed toward a civil war in the near future, including 53% of Republicans and 39% of Democrats. That's not a real big stretch. I'm sure the margin of error is at least, 1 to 2%. The thing I found the most alarming is that more than half of Republicans think that we're imminently headed towards a civil war, said Susan Cork, director of the Southern Poverty Law Center's Intelligence Project, because it's an intelligence operation. The results show a troubling trend in American politics as younger people become more entrenched in their political views and more likely to resort to, or at least approve of, politically motivated violence. It's become this sense of an existential threat that requires taking up arms, that requires fighting against this force that is operating against them. The views are becoming much more radical, but within the mainstream. James, this does not include burning down half of America in 2020 because of the cop thing. SPLC poll finds substantial support for great replacement theory and other hard right ideas. This is where you would insert that classic PSA. You all right? I learned it by watching you. James?
Crazy stuff happening, isn't it? So, is this surprising? I think we've been documenting this in various aspects for quite a while. Yeah, the controlled demolition, exactly. Controlled demolition of society. So, I think the best definition of the politics itself, or at least the form of government that we live under, is that essentially society is always in some sort of state of civil war, people wanting to rule over each other, and they call some sort of truce around certain set ideas, like, okay, well, we'll have some system where we vote in a leader every 4 years or whatever. But at times where that system starts to fall apart or people don't believe in it, the civil war starts brewing again. And that's exactly what's happening, which leads us directly back to Bilderberg and continuity of government and the economy. Because I think ultimately that's what this is predicated upon. There is the economic infrastructure upon which the political system and everything else is built. And when people start really starting to feel the pinch of the inflation, and suddenly they can't buy things, and suddenly this economy is all becoming robotized. That's another thing that I've seen over the past week, quadrupling in purchases of robots to replace workers and things like this. As that starts to pinch more and more throughout the 2020s, this decade of transformation, clearly there's going to be more and more political turmoil that's going to manifest in Civil War 2.0 kind of talk. And what are they concerned about? Continuity of government. Which, of course, as anyone who is well-versed in, again, old-school trutherism knows, was a huge part of the plans going back decades and decades. It was implemented on 9/11. The state of emergency from 9/11 still under declaration. Whatever continuity of government jiggery-pokery they did behind the scenes that we still don't know about, probably still going on. How are we ever going to know? This is big stuff. I mean, they really are planning for some major events in the coming years. And I think if a civil war suits the overall agenda, I don't think they'll lift a finger to try to stop it. Let's put it that way.
And isn't it interesting? Even in the nomenclature, it's continuity of government, not continuity of free, sovereign human beings. There it is. So in closing, I will mention the new Corbett Report USB Archive Volume 1, the 2007 to 2008, should be here in our hot little hands pretty soon. However, that first batch of USBs is actually nearly already sold out, though, which isn't a surprise. You got to get on there and sign up for the email at newworldnextweek.com so you won't miss that thing that you want. And people say, I want the, World War I conspiracy. I want this thing. We're working on all of it out there. So if you sign up at newworldnextweek.com, you will get an email from CastBot whenever we add new things to the store. To just maybe remind folks, they kicked Corbett off of all the platforms, so we made a store here in the States. DVDs, shirts, we made a Danny Castellara radio play, complimentary Media Monarchy stickers while supplies last. James, this is why I asked you before we got going here. I was like, wait, what was your recent anniversary?
15.
I'm coming up on 17. You just had 15. So, yeah, our combined nearly 32-some years of Corbett Report and Media Monarchy, of course, would not be possible without people's support out there. So that is New World Next Week, episode 487. James?
Absolutely. Well, I very much appreciate all the support that we get from people out there. James, I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate it so much that I'm going to let you go because it looks like you're going to develop scoliosis from stooping over like that. But we will be back next week with more information and maybe adjusted cameras. James, thanks for doing what you do. Talk to you next week.
Cheers, buddy. Thank you.